One thing I always see on LinkedIn and on other social media platforms is that there's a huge difference between the US, Europe, and China. And as you're an experienced expert, I would like to have your opinion on that. What are the main differences in AI between those three regions right now that you can see?
Well, if you look at the US, there's the Silicon Valley, and there were plenty of pioneers around AI there. I think there were also quite some pioneers in Europe, by the way, but often they have disappeared from, the history sections of AI books because oftentimes they didn't publish in English. Then you look at China, more like a newer player in the game, but investing enormous amounts, advancing very rapidly. We in Europe, we are often driven by fear, not by opportunity. So we try to over-regulate things before we actually take advantage of them. And I think the US and China are both pro-innovation, while we in Europe, we're more scared of innovation. And that's certainly a big problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there are two major differences, and one is in the culture. For example, if you look at the US, everyone is very entrepreneurial from a mindset. They take risks, they risk something, they try to create, they innovate. And there are a lot of people who go to excellent universities, but who also get the funding. So, from my perspective, these are the two main differences. One is in culture and in the business culture in US especially, and the other is in the funding. So if you look at funding, especially venture capital in the US or in Europe, I think there's a huge gap. And if you look at the way companies develop, I think this is really important for an industry in order to be innovative over a long term of time, basically.
I agree. Funding is certainly an issue in Central Europe because insurance companies, pension funds, they're not that interested in risk. They're more conservative, but eventually they're not investing in venture capital, AI. So you can get funding in Europe or in the Central Europe, but it's somewhat limited. And once you need more funding, you need to go to the US or to China or wherever. And that's, I think, a big problem that is limiting us, and one that is also one of the main reasons why we're not reaching digital sovereignty. Because if you want to grow, you need to go to the US eventually, and then your IP is there.
Yes, I think so too. I mean, if you look at some top researchers from Germany, for example, some of them started out in Europe, but then as soon as their research hit a certain point, they moved over to the US to private companies. And I think a lot of IP and actually knowledge is centered within large US companies. And I
Yeah.
think this is a huge challenge for the rest of the world. So when we look at these three regions like Europe, the US, and China, some actually portrayed right now like an AI arms race. From my perspective, that's a bit militaristic, but you could say that there's a huge competition between those three blocks right
Yes.
now. And what I would be interested in is who do you think will come out ahead in the end when this KI race is over?
Well, I don't think the AI race will be over anytime soon because AI will remain a hot topic and there will be lots of innovation. But I see China very much at the forefront in the near future because there's just massive amounts of investments, various arguments why. There are certain, military arguments. I don't think they're actually the main reason. If you look at demographic change, the lack of talent, aging society, the situation in China is far worse than in Central Europe because of the one-child policy that was implemented in the late 70s. So AI and further automation is key to China managing demographic change and keeping their population healthy and active. So they are investing massively in AI to address that lack of talent, but also the aging population, to scale healthcare and so forth. And I think they just have the biggest need to invest in all of this. The US, I think, is also a big player. Here in Europe, I'm concerned about the AI Act, which is largely driven by fear. Because if you look both at China and the US, regulation means to them invest in innovation and maybe some rules. But in Europe or in the EU, we always think only about a lot of rules and little investment, and we should reverse that.
I totally agree. I think with the introduction of the AI Act, there is a huge risk, but also an opportunity. And I think the risk is that most of investors and young companies will be detracted and will just move on to other markets because they fear the overregulation, but also the uncertainty of the rules. Because right now, the AI Act has those 4 risk categories, but not as very well defined. So it's not really clear what the path ahead is. And these rules will only come into effect in 2 years from now, but these companies don't really know what they have to adapt to. So
Yes.
it's a huge uncertainty right now in the market. Whereas on the other hand, you also have the opportunity that an AI made in Europe gains a lot of trust in a very important market. So if you have like kind of a guarantee that an AI is really solid and well developed within the European Union, you would gain a lot of trust by the people, don't you think?
Well, I think uncertainty is the big problem. Maybe there's a good intention of the AI Act, but if you look at the first draft, it was 120 pages. Now the accepted amendment 808 is 400 or something pages, with lots of terms that are actually not well defined and lots of very vague definitions. And if you look, for example, at Applied AI, a company based in Munich that is connected to TU Munich, 1 or 2 years ago, they did a study about 100 possible use cases in order to determine the category they would fall in, and for about half of the use cases, they were just unable to identify the category. So that creates a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty is never good because companies may not risk the investment, or the investment may just happen somewhere else around the globe. So I think with the AI Act, there's a good intention, but maybe we can compile this into a 2-page document with the key rules, and then maybe 400 pages how we want to invest in it and, foster innovation. But the AI Act does not address innovation at all, and I think we should just reverse that.
I would like to transition now to more of the company side. When I look at implementation of AI in companies, especially in Germany, I think there are 2 huge challenges right now. One is relating to culture, to corporate culture in Germany, and the other is data. When I talk to companies, some of them really have from my perspective, wrong understanding about risk and what they should do right now, because they argue that AI is something of the future. And I always say AI is right now. It is happening right now, and you have to do something about it. Otherwise, your competitors will price you out of the market because they can produce their products cheaper.
Yes.
And the second challenge is data, because in my view, a lot of German companies do not really manage their data in a really good way in order to harness the capabilities of AI. And they don't even sometimes know where their data is and what their data actually is. So I think these are the 2 main challenges with implementing AI in Germany. What do you think about that? What are the main challenges for implementing AI in businesses?
Yeah, well, one challenge is that a lot of executives are still not too much aware about AI and how to take advantage of it. A lot of SMEs are not willing to take the risk. And then there are all these wrong expectations. We're obviously working on that in order to help with this. But what I keep telling companies all the time is, yes, you can do things cheaper, faster, better with AI. But it is not only that. Because of demographic change, if you don't invest, you won't be able to do your work at all anymore in a couple of years. So the situation will get far worse in a couple of years when we have all these massive number of retirements in the next 5 to 10 years. So yeah, it's about cheaper, better, faster, but actually that you can still do it. And I think that's something that a lot of companies have not understood yet. And I think we also need to support worker unions a lot in understanding this, because most worker unions I talk to, they are deeply concerned about mass unemployment. I keep telling in terms of, an aging society, lack of labor, demographic change. From all the concerns we should have, probably a mass unemployment is probably the one we shouldn't have at all in mind right now, because there are far more pressing issues.
So when you talk to companies, I think it's always important, one, to show them the value that AI can generate, but also to talk to them and illustrate that it's not something that replaces human
Yeah.
labor directly, but that it can actually enhance human labor and act as a co-pilot in different situations and mm, actually make work a little more entertaining and a little more fun for some in the long run. Because right now, a lot of people, I think, have a crisis of being employed in a work that doesn't really fulfill them. And I think
Yes.
there's a really important challenge that a lot of workers feel kind of lost in the society right now, where everything happens faster. So we need to instill a new sense of belonging and a new sense of actually creating something that matters. And I think AI can play a huge part in that.
Yeah, I think it can play a huge role and it can help people to develop, maybe focus on new things, and certain tasks that they don't like too much can be automated. And maybe it will also help us to shift maybe some people among sectors where there is maybe a shortage. Some people could be moved there, and AI can also be a huge opportunity for retraining, because with AI you can get individual feedback or individual content based on your learning, something that we can hardly do, in class. So I think AI can also help people to maybe improve, learn AI, and find their purpose or see how they can actually, contribute to the AI transformation. And yes, I keep telling all the time, AI alone is not going to put you out of business. Rather, it's your competitor, and your competitor may be your friendly colleague sitting at a desk next to you. If he or she starts using AI and you don't, then you're out of business. And we definitely need humans in the game because we need domain expertise. So I think that's why we need human intelligence first and then artificial intelligence and combine it. But it's not just that the AI would put everyone out of business.
I totally agree. I think what is really important to understand, because right now there's a lot of debate about implementing AI strategies, and a lot of companies try to create AI strategies. But from my perspective, they should be concerned about business strategy first and really think about how AI relates to their business.
Yes.
Because otherwise, you would approach the question of AI from a tool first perspective, because it's always a tool that should be employed as a means to an end.
Yes.
And they would have to start from the end, they would have to achieve first. So otherwise, they
Yeah.
would run into a lot of errors. And I think this is a very common misunderstanding right now, that AI can solve almost anything,
Yeah.
but that you have to start with your business first and then actually also think about in which areas AI actually makes sense.
Yeah.
Because sometimes there is even an easier solution or a better one than implementing AI, although
Yeah.
it can help with a lot of things.
I keep saying that all the time because on the internet you find all sort of guidelines of how to identify AI projects. I'm not sure if that is the ultimate solution, because like this you're coming with AI as a solution, but then you're maybe not just looking for problems. In the worst case, you're creating new problems that had actually not existed in the first place. So better look at concrete business problems and then solve them as easy as possible. If 2 or 3 rules are enough, you don't need a neural network. However, if your business process just doesn't work because it's maybe too complex with a lot of mutual dependencies, AI will also not help you. So you need to rethink the business process first and then put AI on top of that. So wrong expectations are a big problem, I think. And sometimes I see the same when I visit companies and they say, we want to do AI. And I say, yeah, what do you want to do? And I say, we have a data set here. We want to do AI. Yes, what do you want to do? And then I say, the AI should figure out something useful we can do with that data set. And I say, well, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So your experience, it would be that you would have to start with a concrete use case or a certain goal in mind first, or what
Yes,
would it be the most
exactly.
important?
Concrete use cases where you have what you want to improve in the company, how you want to remain competitive. And then AI may be the solution or not. Maybe you can solve it completely differently, but eventually AI is just a tool. AI is very helpful for a certain class of problems, but definitely not for all problems. And you need human intelligence first.
I totally agree. I think you cannot put the human out of the loop, so to speak. And I think it's really important to use your own mind first, even before you deal with the AI, because you need to tell the AI in most cases what it should do. I mean,
Yes.
it has no goal in itself, so you need to define a direction it should head in.
Yes.
And I think this is one of the main parts where humans are differentiated from AI, because in the systems right now, we don't see that they are self-aware and that they can pursue their own goals, at least from my understanding. But humans can. They can have a vision, they can have an idea about the future and develop it out of themselves. And I think this is one of the main differentiators between us and machines right now, that we can act as individuals with a concrete idea about how the future should look like.
I agree, because most of the machine learning models we use today, even the most complex neural networks, are often just supervised learning, and what I'm doing is an interpolation in a high-dimensional space. We don't know how the human brain works exactly, but I guess it's somewhat more complex than that. And yes, we as humans, we have strengths like vision, long-term goals. Maybe we want to, give something to our kids that they would give to their kids. So think in terms of the next, 5 to 10 generations. That's something I don't think an AI does. Most AI models, they're not really smart. They're pretty stupid, but they can be very helpful as a tool. And I think we as humans, we can use it the right way, but we should obviously design or do the AI transformation in a way that benefits us, because we as humans should benefit from the AI transformation and not have AI as an end in itself.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. From my perspective, there are very different tasks that AI is really good at right now and is becoming increasingly better. And one domain that struck me really throughout the past years is creativity, because this is one domain where we as humans thought, well, we are the cream of the crop. Nobody can beat us. We are the only species on this planet who can be really creative. And now we see these large language models and image generating capabilities who get a lot better over time, where it gets more difficult to tell, well, what is really creative or who is really creating new things.
Yes.
So I feel a bit challenged in my role as human by these new capabilities.
Yes. Well, there's obviously a huge debate whether generative AI is creative, but I also don't know that definition of creativity for which there has been a consensus. And we as humans, we also eventually we learn from examples and we learn a pattern. And if you look at artists, yes, they looked at of lots of other artists and finally came up with their own pattern in there. And eventually the generative AI is doing more or less the same. So yeah, we are challenged, but I think you should see it as an opportunity to become even better, to use AI in your pipeline, to deliver better results. And if you don't use these tools, probably you're out of business. And you look right now at all, like artists, musicians, whatever, at the lower end, they're obviously very scared because those are the ones whose song was, put on a CD in order to fill it, or that it was played randomly on Spotify. And obviously they are out of business if there's generative AI generated arts. But maybe you should see this as an opportunity. You may find a different job. We have a lack of talent in many other fields. Maybe it's just an inefficiency. And same in Hollywood. Obviously, there are actors that got paid 30 million for a movie. Do they really need to get paid 30 million? I'm a total capitalist, and I think if you work hard and you earn that well, that's fantastic. But it's an inefficiency. Yeah, maybe it was super selective to make it there, but if they, just record you for one day and then generate a movie, and the customers also get better movies and maybe, customized movie, well, then it's an inefficiency in the market. And AI can maybe help us to correct certain inefficiencies.
What would you say right now with the current AI models? What is one thing that they can do a lot better than any human in this world right now?
Well, obviously, there are many AI models. There's not just generative AI, there's much more. Well, they can make decisions, obviously, much faster than humans. In many cases, probably better. At least, very narrow AIs that do better in a certain problem. also helps us to sometimes make decisions that humans weren't able to make at all. But we as humans, we can sort of try to double check it, to have the domain expertise. Because for machine learning, it's garbage in, garbage out. Whatever data you put in, you'll find some pattern. Does that make any sense? Well, the AI doesn't know. And this is where humans come into play.
And the other question, like, you have children, and they are at a very young age right now. So what can they do better than any AI? What is the main differentiator?
They are super curious, you know. So my daughters, they're 2 and 4, and I'm just amazed by how quickly they're learning, and they're curious to try out new things. It's a certain kind of curiosity we as adults have lost to some extent, I think, and I'm just amazed how quickly they're learning, and I was wondering, you know, how could an AI mimic that kind of behavior? And I'm trying to understand it now, because in 5 years, that moment is over, you know. Or I need another kid, you know, to see this. So it's curiosity, I think, and, you know, just trial and error and all of this. I'm just super amazed to see the kids learning, you know.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it's the sense of wonder.
Yes, I think that's super far away, and just because we have made some progress in generative AI, it doesn't mean that, you know, the AI will totally take over in a couple of years. I don't think you can make that kind of projection if you're serious. So I think it's still quite far away.
Yeah. So you think these projections about a general AI that can do all sorts of tasks is pretty far ahead?
It's super far away. I think all those claims around artificial general intelligence, they are largely exaggerated. It's a lot of marketing buzz. I think and then they claim, yeah, we just need more data and bigger models. I don't think this will help at all to get better to that extent. I think obviously we're making progress in AI, and I'm super excited that we make more progress. But the artificial general intelligence, I think for this we would also have to rethink computer science from scratch. So it's not just, you know, building a bigger neural network, but probably we have to rethink a lot of parts in computer science. And that's so far away, so I don't see it happening. Obviously there is progress and there will be more, but probably not seriously towards artificial general intelligence. But it also depends on how you define artificial general intelligence. So some people keep saying it's actually happening already, while others say it's super far away. It's the same with the Turing test, which is quite weak on its definition, actually. And we need to come maybe to reasonable terms when we define this, because otherwise sort of every, you know, projection may become true, depending on how you define artificial general intelligence.
One thing that is always hotly debated in AI is the concern of ethics and bias. So, for example, when Google released their Gemini model a couple of weeks ago, they had a huge scandal because it produced some pretty weird pictures of historically false images from World War II and from popes, and there has been a huge debate around that. So what I would be interested in is, how do you see this debate? Is it easy to get bias out of the data, or is it more that you need the right kind of data? How can you approach this question?
Well, the term bias in AI is now, I think, largely used as a political tool, you know, by all this wokeness agenda and this kind of stuff. But most people talking about it, I think they have little clue what bias actually means. It's something I've been investigating for the last 80 years or something, and I've published about it. So bias, first of all, means, let's start with, in a machine learning model, you have your training data and you have your test or production data. Obviously, these data sets are different, that's key. But if the distributions from which these data sets come are different, then you have a bias. And then there are many kinds of different biases that you can define, that you can try to correct for partially, but there will always be some bias left, because you have to make some assumption eventually. Also, your models will always make a certain bias and an assumption, for example, if the hypothesis is linear or nonlinear. So there's a bias at many different levels, not just in the data sets, but also in the models. But I think we can also just see biases in data as a sort of, you know, reflection on ourselves, because where does the data come from? By humans who have made that biased decision, who have made racist decisions or discriminatory decisions, and the AI will learn that pattern eventually. So it can just be, a reflection. We can see what we have made wrong. The AI itself doesn't come up with racism, And then with the Google model, that one I think was a particular disaster because they trained it on the data that was publicly available. Obviously, there was no data available of a POPUS or whatever, that didn't exist. But what they did is when you wrote your prompt, they enriched that prompt secretly in order to give you a more diverse response. And that's something they shouldn't have done because the model itself didn't generate these images, but the prompts were amended automatically. And that's something you couldn't stop. And I think that led to that disaster. And yeah, sometimes there is simply a certain bias. And I think that's, depending on the use case, that's fine. Like a bias is, we want hardworking people to become, and the smartest to become professors or CEOs of companies. Yes, that's a bias, and probably that's a good one. So bias doesn't always necessarily mean a negative one. Yes, if it's discriminatory against certain things you have no control over, like your race or something, then that's a problem, obviously. But there will always be some bias, and sometimes a bias is actually helpful because that's something you may want to learn. But I think it's a highly political, woke debate now, and most of those who are involved in that discussion, they don't actually have an in-depth technical background.
Yeah, I agree. I think what is really important to understand about bias is that it just means that you're deviating from your wanted result. And in my perspective, you can only replace one bias with another one. You will always face certain kind of trade-offs. And what we really need to focus on with the question of bias is which biases do we accept as a society or in certain contexts, and which biases don't we accept.
Yes.
And really differentiate between those two questions, because there will always be a certain distortion in your data or in your models, so you will get bias eventually. But we need to have an honest and open debate about what kind of biases do we deem acceptable in certain spaces, and where do we put red tape on, and where do we try to eliminate certain discriminations against certain groups of people.
Absolutely, I think that's so important. And something I noticed 8 years ago when I started doing research into this, it was actually bias in inspection data of meters in order to detect electricity theft. This is how I got into the issue of bias, because was there a bias for which meters got inspected or which customers? And then I was able to generalize this understanding to many other problems. And I felt a lot of professors that I talked to 8 years ago, they had no clue that this was actually a big issue, that your production data may be from a different distribution than your training data. And still today, I think a lot of AI professors, they don't understand this, they're not aware of it, so they don't include it in their courses. And then we are training the next generation of data scientists that are not aware of this either. I teach a big data course. Biases in data sets is actually something I discuss, not much from a political perspective, purely from a technical perspective, and that there are certain implications, just to make them aware of what kind of biases are there, how can you detect it, how can you correct it, maybe not fully correct it, say reduce it. These are the things I discuss in my big data course. But I think most AI professors don't do that, and that's probably a huge problem.
I think it's super important and at technical schools, because it is really important, since these data scientists, they determine our future in a lot of systems. So we need to make them ethically aware and need to make them aware about certain biases, and also have them reflect on their choices that they make in these technical systems, because eventually they will influence people's lives.
Absolutely.